Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I am your host, Chris Mitchell. We've been talking about the coronavirus and its impact on the financial markets. We were also talking a little bit about oil and some of the other impacts of what possibly caused today's market. I've been calling it lunacy or insanity and things like that. We also talked about just some of the comings and goings of what's actually going on in the market. But a lot of it has been coronavirus, but we've been talking about both the coronavirus as well as what's going on in the oil industry and the trade war, as you might call it, between Russia and OPEC and Saudi Arabia. Right now, for segment number 3 of our program, we're going to talk about the Fed and how it cut rates. Now, the reason behind the Fed is supposedly it's supposed to stimulate spending. It's not necessarily supposed to specifically. It's not supposed to be political. It's not supposed to specifically react to any specific thing unless it somehow is detrimental to the continued growth of the economy. So the idea behind cutting rates is to increase investing. So because it makes it easier for businesses to borrow money, and when they borrow money, they invest it, they spend it, they hire, they invest in R&D, variety of things. Whatever they want to do with it, the goal is to borrow money cheaper, to get money cheaper, and then use that money to invest, which is good for the future. That's what when the Fed cuts rates, that's what they're supposed to do. Now, just last week, they cut rates by 0.5 point. That is significant. 0.5 point may not mean anything to people who don't follow the stock market or the mortgage rates or anything like that, for that matter. But it's the first time that the Fed has cut rates by 0.5 point since late 2008, which was the financial crisis. The financial crisis almost brought down the entire world economy. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. The ripple effect of the financial crisis was so fundamental in the whole foundation of the world's economy that it almost brought down the entire economy. The Fed cut the rate 0.5 point then. So just to look at it from that, we were in a truly, we were possibly on the verge of a worldwide depression. Something far worse than we ever saw during the Hoovervilles and the actual depression that we had in America. We almost created that on a world scale in 2008. And the Fed, as a way to try to deal with that, cut rates by 0.5 point. And now, I guess, theoretically, because of the coronavirus, they cut it by 0.5 point recently. Now, that seems like an overreaction, which is part of maybe the problem. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. I think they can be criticized for that. But just to give you an idea of how significant a 0.5 point cut in the Fed rate can mean, if it is accurate. If you were to say apples to apples, that crisis in 2008 is equal to what we are now, which I don't believe is the case, but if you look at it, that's theoretically what it should be. That just gives you an idea of how serious a 0.5 point cut is. And that's interesting, to say the least. Now, to give you an idea, as I've been talking about here, the idea of cutting rates is it's supposed to stimulate investing, but it also means that some people earn money on Fed rates. Some people do earn money. So when the rates are cut, those people will, in fact, make less money. Now, those rates are on bank accounts and things like that. Credit cards will go down, so the price to pay off the interest on your credit cards those rates will go down. So you'll pay a little bit less to pay off your credit card debt. Like I said, you'll make a little bit less money on your bank accounts, to save your money in a bank, but nobody's making much money on those anyway. These are relatively minor impacts, but they are impacts on the positive or the negative nonetheless. Something also to keep in mind is the cut. If the cut doesn't succeed in stimulating investment, then all it does is reduce those incomes in those small ways. But the money doesn't end up getting spent in the industry. People don't end up borrowing. So even though the rates are low and they're there for the taking, people won't take advantage of it because they don't want any debt. Never mind the lower price of it. So the cutting rates will eventually lower interest, like I said, on credit cards and things like that. But if giving people the opportunity for stimulus, if they don't actually use it, it defeats the purpose and will result in potential negative consequences going forward. Another thing to keep in mind is when they did do that, when they cut the rates, the stock market did have a momentary increase. The market was dropping. They cut the rates. People in the market reacted relatively quickly, and it boosted the market for a very short period of time. But then it went back to dropping again. So the cut, was great for day traders, but it wasn't great in any meaningful way to the stock market on the whole. And as I said, the more the Fed cuts rates, the more often they do it, the less of a benefit or the less of an impact it has in the future. So it's kind of like crying wolf. If you scream for help, someone comes by and they save you, that's great. You were just saved, but the wolf wasn't there. So someone came to get you even though you didn't really need them. Next time, maybe they show up slower, or maybe they don't show up at all. So that's something to keep in mind as they cut rates, because going forward, there's speculation that they're going to cut rates again, possibly as much as another half a point over the next month or two. And there's some thought that they might cut the rates by 1.25%, and they could even cut rates down to negatives. So the Fed rates could actually be below zero. There's some speculation that by July, the Fed could cut rates all the way to zero or below. That's something that never happens. I don't know if it's ever happened in America. The UK currently has negative rates in the 2 and 5 year rates, and that's the first time they've ever done that. So negative rates or zero is an extremely rare existence, a very rare occurrence, and there's been some speculation that we are going to have that as we enter the summertime in July. So that's something that's going to be extremely interesting to watch. Going forward, when it comes to the markets and the impact of the Fed and what they would like monetary policy to accomplish, the speculation is that the market would like to see a financial package to deal with the stock market volatility rather than rely on the Fed to try to beat down the collapse by cutting rates. So the market would rather see a governmental policy agenda that solves these issues rather than relying on the Fed to essentially scare markets back into benefiting. And as I mentioned before, Lloyd Blankfein, previous CEO of Goldman Sachs, said that the Fed cuts were political. They weren't necessary. The fundamentals of our economy are good. Jobs are way up, as I said, a great number in February. The fundamentals are there. All the numbers were really breezing along extremely well. We were hearing that. And so this panic with the coronavirus, essentially the Fed didn't need to cut because the fundamentals were good, but because of the air of uncertainty and instability around the coronavirus, they did it to try to quell those concerns. That doesn't sound like a good way to do business if you're the Fed, but if you're Lloyd Blankfein, he believes that that's what happened. And as I said as well, Stephanie Rule of MSNBC, her belief is that the whole point of cutting the Fed rates is to stimulate investment and borrowing, but when you've got the coronavirus, people aren't going to invest, not because they don't want to make more money, but because they're just afraid of everything that's going on. People aren't going to travel. So why would an airline invest and spend money when they don't see money coming in the not too distant future? Investing is supposed to stimulate future income. Well, if you don't believe that income is going to be stimulated for any reason, then there's no reason in throwing money into things. It's just wasteful spending. And like I said before, the more often the Fed cuts the rates, the less power they have the next time. They have less room to cut rates. And if the impact on cutting rates wasn't all that impactful before, then why would it spur markets to revive themselves based on what they just saw if you do the same exact thing again? So those are all reasons to be cautious about what we're seeing and a little bit hesitant about what the Fed has been doing. So those are all things to look out for. One interesting fact, because I try to watch the financial news programs when I can, and something that I found fascinating in one of the shows today. Almost half, this is a number that I find just completely fascinating. Almost half of credit that's given to citizens and businesses come from non-banks. Now, banks, like I said, they're taking a hammering today for a variety of reasons. And really, none of them, it's their fault. Like I said, the fundamentals of the banking industry are actually good at the moment. But because of the outside forces that are impacting them, they're just getting hammered today. Mostly because of the situation with OPEC and the oil and the trade war that's going on. But half of credit that goes to citizens and businesses come from non-banks. They call it the shadow system. So while banks in the financial industry are being hammered, half of all lending doesn't even come from them. So even if they are being damaged and pummeled and their bottom lines are being significantly reduced or punished, half of our credit comes from somewhere else anyway. And at the end of the day, credit is the most important thing. One of the real concerns that happened during the financial crisis was people were house rich, or in some cases house poor. They had mortgages that were higher than the value of their homes. That was one of the problems. But another part of the problem was people weren't making the money that they necessarily could, or they had mortgage payments that were higher than they should have had, but they couldn't refinance because the banks weren't giving out money, and they couldn't sell their homes because no one had money to buy homes. So people could have a $200,000 mortgage on an $800,000 house, but they couldn't refinance to pay their bills, and they couldn't sell the house even though there was equity in the property. So they ended up being foreclosed on. So the banks ended up taking on all these properties and all the expenses that goes with it, paying the taxes, paying the insurance, all these different things. Even though there was no real necessary reason for that to happen, it's just that was the functioning reality, is that when money gets frozen, everything gets frozen and people suffer. So in today's world, that's really that's not necessarily the case. Now, because of this, the shadow system, 50% of all loans coming from outside of the banking world. Now, maybe in a panic situation, the shadow system decides to cut off lending as well, but they're speculative. They're not regulated in the way the other ways were, and they may be more speculative and more willing to lend in times of crisis than banks. So I found it interesting that half of all credit is provided through the shadow system rather than the banking industry. I found that extremely interesting. So when we come back, how can monetary policy affect coronavirus damage to the economy and the Fed? Should they be dictating to the markets, or should they just be a judge or referee on the markets rather than actually trying to dictate what goes on? That's what we've just been talking about. When we get back, I want to talk about the mortgage industry. I used to work in the mortgage industry as a loan officer. It's interesting. I was working in the mortgage industry during the financial crisis. It was fascinating what was going on then. It was fascinating what people were doing then. I want to give you a little bit of information because your house, one of the reasons why the financial crisis happened was Bill Clinton wanted to make it easier for low and middle class people to be able to purchase homes. So he wanted to reduce restrictions, provide ways for them to get into their homes, because he saw that the way that people were going to retire, with the problems in Social Security and with and the disparity in incomes, one of the ways that people could retire was by building up the equity in their home over years, and it's almost like an investment. And then they sell their home, they downsize, and they use that money from their home to fund their retirement. That was one of the theories behind reducing regulations and opening up the mortgage industry. Because it started with Bill Clinton, and the collapse happened because of the Bush administration. But that was one of his intents. And, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's essentially what happened with the Clinton administration. So, equity in your home is one way in which you can fund your retirement. But savings on a month-to-month basis was one way that people were saving their day-to-day lives during the Bush administration. People kept refinancing, either taking money out of their homes or just refinancing to reduce their monthly payment so that they could more easily afford what they were getting. So if you can save $100, $200, $300, $400 a month just by refinancing, even if maybe over the long term you end up spending more in interest, that was an appealing kind of financial decision that people made during the craziness of the mortgage industry that eventually led to the financial crisis when it came to the mortgage world. But that's something to look at in the problems we're having right now. So we'll look at the mortgage industry and mortgage rates when we come back here on the GSMC Financial News Podcasts, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Chris Mitchell, and we'll be back with mortgage rates and the industry next.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I am your host, Chris Mitchell. We've been talking about the coronavirus. We've been talking about Fed rate cuts. We've been talking about the trade war in the oil industry. And now we're going to talk about mortgage rates. Mortgage rates, as I said in the previous segment, they can be a way for you to save money. They can be a way for you to play the markets. You can use it. Mortgages can actually be used as sort of an investment tool. If you want to refinance in order to save money on a monthly basis, but reducing your payments by $200 to $400, $500, $600 a month, that kind of savings, you can use that to invest. You can use that to just to lower your monthly burden. You can use an adjustable rate mortgage. You can play that game. Not only can you maybe save $600, $800, $900, $1,000 a month because the interest rates for an adjustable are lower than the interest rates for, say, a 30-year fixed, but you can play whether the rates change, whether they go up or they go down. Or you can refinance. So you can refinance from an adjustable to a fixed. These are all potential financial tools. Now, you may end up losing money over the long term, or you may end up winning in the long term based on how much interest you end up paying or when you end up selling. There's a lot that can be done in the mortgage industry as far as if you want to use it as a financial tool. I'm not an advisor. I'm not going to advise anyone on how to do it. But the fact of the matter is interest rates and the different programs out there can create ways of impacting your financial situation. And you can use it as an investment tool if you want to. 30-year fix right now are at a record low. They're at 3.76, I believe was exactly. Usually interest rates are at quarter point rate. So you don't get really a rate of 3.76. You get a rate of 3.75. But that's what the 30-year fix is at right now. The 10-year Treasury yield is actually dropping faster than the 30, which is a little bit strange because the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year fixed are usually relatively closely tied together. But right now, not quite as much. And part of that is because of the refinancing boom. It's actually overwhelming the Treasury yield. Some interesting things that I was able to come across today on watching some of the financial podcasts and watching the financial programs was that Chase Bank is actually stopping their email marketing to reduce requests for refinancing. So they send you out spam and junk mail, which most of us just delete or ignore, or they go right into our spam mail. We never even actually get it. But they're getting so many requests for refinancing that they're stopping that. So even though the success rate on those aren't very high, most of us delete those emails anyway, they're going to stop it because they're getting too many requests for free refinances. That's how crazy the industry is right now. If you're interested in trying to make a nice living and you're not happy with your job right now, look into becoming a loan officer because rates are great and the business is booming. Another bank that is impacted, Wells Fargo. They're adding jobs. They're adding ancillary workers to handle the overflow of interest from borrowers for refinances. So Wells Fargo is actually investing in their company because of the boom, and Chase is cutting back because they're getting too much. That's kind of crazy. Just to give you an idea of one way that financially you can use your mortgage as an investment tool. Just to give you an idea of some of the ways in which it just impacts money. I'm not going to give you strategic advice. I can't do that. I don't even think I'm allowed to do that, and I'm not an expert to be able to even do that, even if I wanted to. But let me just give you an idea of what we're talking about. A $300,000 loan, let's say you're at 5.25. Rates are much lower than that, But if you're in the 7th or 8th year of a loan, maybe you got a good rate in the 5s or the 4s, 7 or 8 years ago. So a $300,000 loan on a 30-year fixed at 5.25 would be $1,656 a month. That does not include taxes and interest. That's purely your principal and interest payment. Everyone's taxes and insurance are different. So I'm not going to try to guess what yours is. But just for the principal and interest on a $300,000 loan at 5.25, you're looking at $1,656 a month. Now, depending on when you first got your loan and the impact on your overall interest payments, and things like that, those are all things you need to consider when you're going to decide whether you want to refinance or not. But just purely from a numbers perspective, a $300,000 loan at 4.75 is $1,564. So from refinancing from 5.25 to 4.75, you're going to save almost $100 a month, $92 to be exact. So $92 a month for 12 months, you're looking at almost $1,000 in savings over a year. More than $1,000, I'm sorry. You're looking at something close to almost $1,200, a little over $1,100 per year. So if you want to save $1,100 a year, that's just a half a point. Now, rates are at 3.75. So if you were at 5.25, if you just went down to 4.75, which isn't the going rate at the moment, you'd save $92. If you dropped from 5.25 to 3.75, which is the current going rate, a $300,000 loan at 3.75 is $1,389. So you're looking at about $270 a month savings. And if you had refinanced a loan at $300,000 back 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, you're not going to have a $300,000 loan now. So I'm just doing it apples to apples. A $300,000 loan at 5.25 is $1,656. A $300,000 loan at 3.75 is $1,389. So you're looking at almost $275 a month savings. So think about that. That's like almost $3,000 a year. I think it's even more than $3,000. I'm doing these real quickly in my head. So by refinancing for the same exact loan amount from 5.25 to 3.75, you're going to save almost $3,000 a year. Now, in all likelihood, if you had a $300,000 loan 5 years ago, you're probably down, somewhere around $270, $260. And so you'd save even more. And when you reduce the balance, the savings is far larger than just reducing the percentage. So just to think about that, that is significant savings when it comes to just refinancing. Imagine what you could do with that money if you want to, whether you want to spend it or whether you want to invest it or put it somewhere or whatever you want to do. But that's a pretty significant impact. And that's purely mortgage rates. And that's based on with the Fed cutting rates. With the Fed cutting rates, mortgage rates are going down, and that's one way that a lot of people can benefit. So that's what we're looking at here. All right, we're going to go to the next segment, segment 5. We're going to talk a little bit about previous pandemics when we return here on the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I'm your host, Chris Mitchell, and I'll be right back talking about previous pandemics.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the GSMC Financial News Podcast. I am your host, Chris Mitchell, and this is the GSMC Podcasting Network. We've been talking about the coronavirus, mortgage rates, the impact of the oil issues with OPEC in Russia and Saudi Arabia, and some of the impacts of the Fed rate cuts and things like that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit, because we were talking about the coronavirus before. Now I want to talk about the impact of previous pandemics on the economies in general. And I just wanted to go over some of the recent impacts. Back in 1981, during the HIV and AIDS problems or concerns or the outbreak, The S&P, which we talked about before, is way down, about 15% today. The S&P is getting killed in the stock market today. The 6-month impact of on the S&P for AIDS during 1981 was only 0.3% in the negative, 0.3 over 6 months. So it had almost no impact on the S&P over the 6 month. 12 months. After 12 months, the impact was a little bit more significant. It was 16.5%, and that's in the negative. So the 12-month impact of HIV and AIDS in 1981 during that pandemic was the negative impact over a 12-month span on the S&P was 16.5%. But that was over a 12-month span. The S&P is down 15% today. So that's something to keep in mind. The S&P is down 15%. Let me just make sure. The major averages are down 19%. I'm sorry. So they're down 19% today. And the S&P is down almost 20% from its peak. So most of the major outlets are down 19%. The S&P is down 20% from its peak. Over a 12-month span during the HIV outbreak, over a 12-month span, the S&P only went down 16.5%. So that gives you an idea of the impact of what a pandemic can be and how severe this quick little snapshot in time is on the S&P right now. Now, in September of 1994, the pneumonic plague. I don't remember that, to be honest with you, but nonetheless, it was a plague. It was actually up. Over a 6-month span on the S&P, rates were up 8.2%. And over a 12-month span, it was up 26.3%. So during the pneumonic plague, the S&P actually increased 8% over 6 months and 26% over 12 months. When SARS happened in 2003, I remember that. I had a friend who thought he was infected. Over the 6-month span, it was up 14.59%, and over the 12-month span, it was up 20.76%. The avian flu in 2006, up 11.66% in the 6-month, 18.36% over the 12-month. The dengue fever in 2006. 2006 had a lot of problems when it came to issues. The flu, the fever, my goodness. The S&P was up 6.36% over the 6 months and 14.29% over the 12 month. And these are up. So right now, the S&P is down 20% from its peak. Most of the major markets are down 19% right now. And these are down. Most of the other S&P during these other pandemics, the markets actually improved over a 12-month span. So that's just something to keep in mind is right now we're in a severe panic. But if you look back at previous pandemics or outbreaks of negative kinds, we actually benefited from them. The swine flu in 2009, 18.72% up in the 6 month, 35.96%. So almost a third. The S&P increased almost a third during the swine flu in 2009 over the 12-month span. Cholera, 13.95 and 5.63. MERS during 2013, we all remember MERS, 10.74 and 17.96. Again, up 10% and up 17% over the 6th and 12-month span. Ebola, 2014. President Obama got a lot of criticism for his handling of that. The S&P went up 5%, 5.34% over 6 month and 10.44% over the 12 month. So it doubled the 6 month almost during Ebola. The measles in 2014, 0.20. So it stayed basically stable for the 6 month and it was down 0.73 over the 12. So during the measles and Ebola, it basically stayed stable. Zika, everyone remembers Zika, the 2016, up 12% for 6 months, up 17.45% on the 12 month. And then measles and Ebola again in 2019. So we had it in December of 2014. We also had it in June of 2019. It was up 9.82%. And for some reason, the stat that I got it from has NA, so not applicable. So I guess they didn't examine the 12 month for that one. And they just looked at that as temporary. So for all of us out there watching the markets and concerned about the coronavirus, and there's lots of reasons to be worried, and it is going to affect a lot of our economy, and it looks like that's going to be the case. On the stock market, the impacts end up being much less significant. So right now, it's looking like horrible. It's looking horrible today. But 6 months from now and a year from now, we may even be up. So just a little reason for hope. I'm your host, Chris Mitchell. This is the the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. When I come back, the lighter side of the financial world. We'll talk about some billionaires not having the best of days, some industries that are actually benefiting from the disease and from the virus and from the lunacy of the way that we behave here in America. We'll talk about that when we come back.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I am your host, Chris Mitchell. We've been talking about the financial markets that have just had an insane day out there. We've talked about the coronavirus. We've talked about the Fed cutting rates, the impacts of those, the impact on the oil industry with Saudi Arabia and Russia appearing to go to a trade war over the desire to reduce production of oil. Russia doesn't want to do it. Speculation is that they want to hurt America and the shale industry and the fracking industry because of the sanctions that we put on them. That's a speculation. We don't know if that's a fact. We haven't heard any statements out of Russia to confirm that, but the speculation is that they want to hurt us because our sanctions are hurting them. So we talked about that. We talked about mortgage rates in ways that the rates are at all-time lows. Refinancing is booming out there. Banks are actually struggling to deal with the volume of people that want to refinance. So that we've been talking about all of that. And now we're talking about a few of the lighter sides of what's going on in the financial world. So let me tell you a couple good things. And I figure as an American, if you can't take pleasure in someone else's suffering, then maybe you're not American. For those of you out there with the horrible crashes in the market, not too many people are benefiting, and I will get into a few that actually are. So a lot of us are suffering, but some of us are suffering a lot worse. And Bernie Sanders would love this. Billionaires. Billionaires are suffering. Jeff Bezos lost $6 billion today. The crash in the markets today cost Jeff Bezos $6 billion. And it cost him $6 billion when there was a crash about 6 weeks ago, I believe it was, or 6 months ago. So, with today's crash, it may have hurt you, but it hurt Jeff Bezos a lot more. Now, that may just mean he can't buy 5 more jet planes and 2 more billionaire yachts. But nonetheless, Jeff Bezos lost $6 billion today. And a lot of that was lost before he even got up and out of bed in the morning. So Jeff Bezos lost $6 billion today. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook. A lot of people are not very happy with Facebook based on how they handled the elections and just in general. The fact that they seem to be stealing our information and not telling us about it. A lot of people aren't very happy with Mark Zuckerberg. They're not very happy with Facebook and the way they treat their users. He's lost $4 billion today. And so is Warren Buffett. I think Warren Buffett's a nice guy. He comes across as a Santa Claus-y, happy grandfather kind of guy, nice guy. Doesn't seem like he's a mean person. I've never heard anyone say, voice contempt or anger towards a Warren Buffett, sort of like they do with Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. But nonetheless, he's lost $4 billion as well. So, Jeff Bezos down $6 billion with the crash today. Mark Zuckerberg and Warren Buffett down $4 billion. Now, a few of the industries that are actually benefiting from what's going on out there right now. The disinfectants, the disinfectant industry are booming. So if you own Clorox stock or Lysol or Purell, you're all benefiting because everyone wants to kill germs, and the way that you kill them is using some of these products. Germaphobes, like President Trump, they have to be taking solace in knowing that everyone is washing their hands. Not only are they washing their hands more, exponentially more, but they're also washing their hands better. They're using hot water. They're washing them for 20 seconds. You hear all these now. I didn't know you were supposed to wash your hands in any exact specific way, but you are, and now we're learning about that. So germaphobes who don't like to shake hands, don't like people touching people, take solace in knowing that now we are getting closer to as paranoid and anal about cleanliness as you have been doing for all these years. So, germaphobes, congratulations. The coronavirus might kill some people, but it'll make a lot more people a lot easier to shake hands with. So congratulations to you. This is my own personal opinion. We're seeing it today in the markets, but I think we're going to see this going forward. Some benefits of the coronavirus, so businesses that are going to benefit, will be the Netflix and the streaming companies. Anyone who provides entertainment so that you don't have to leave your couch, those are people that are going to benefit. So Netflix, Hulu, any television network in general. We're going to be watching more TV, if that was even possible. It looks like now we're going to be. People aren't going to be going to theaters to watch movies. They're going to be buying movies on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all those. So even though Jeff Bezos lost $6 billion today, he'll make it all back because you're going to watch more Prime videos over the next year. But nonetheless, the streaming services are all going to benefit from this coronavirus. And this is one, I think, a contradictory opinion, or at least it seems incongruent to what most people may think. I'm a sports guy, and I think the NCAA is going to benefit huge from the coronavirus. Now, March Madness is coming up, and there's a concern that they may have to have games without fans. They may have empty stadiums. They've done this in the past. There was an outbreak on a campus that had a championship game, so the teams that played in that championship game played to an empty stadium. We could have that. By the time March Madness comes in another week and a half, we could be in a situation where they just don't, either people don't show up because they don't feel safe going, or just out of the abundance of caution, they may actually not allow fans in at all. So they may have to refund money, or people may ask for refunds if they're allowed to go, and they'll have to decide whether they're going to refund people's tickets or not. We'll see what happens with that. But I think the opposite. I think that'll be bad. People who are hosting the sites will suffer, but that's not the NCAA. They actually, I think the sites pay the NCAA to carry those outlets. So those outlets have already paid the NCAA, so they're going to lose big time. But the NCAA itself won't be impacted by people not showing up or by the stadiums being empty. But they will benefit from larger TV audiences. Because every single new TV contract is based on the old one. And I think this is going to be a boom in the TV ratings. People are going to be watching less of it. There are going to be fewer people on site. There are going to be more people on TV. Plus, there are going to be a lot more people at home doing nothing. So rather than at work during those 1 o'clock afternoon, Thursday afternoon games or the 3 o'clock games, they're going to be at home working, which means they're going to be watching the NCAA tournament. So I think the NCAA, in their next TV contract, booming numbers for them. Huge benefits. All right, that's our program for today. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. We'd really appreciate that. Also, if you can, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. As you saw, Mark Zuckerberg needs it. He lost $4 billion today. Get on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook, as well as Twitter and Instagram. Thank you. From your host, Chris Mitchell. You can follow me on Twitter at CJMitch73, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.